Morning to you, Minister.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. I want to start on the welfare bill,
Sure.
a kind of big topic that's been brewing over the last week or so in particular. What's the latest government position? Is this something where discussions are ongoing or concessions are about to be made?
Well, discussions are certainly ongoing. You would expect that ahead of the second reading that's due to take place next Tuesday. 120 of our colleagues in the parliamentary party have signed that reasoned amendment. And so in that sense, we've read very carefully what that reasoned amendment says. The first thing that strikes you when you read the amendment is the degree of commonality on the principles. Everyone agrees welfare needs reform and that the system was broken. Everyone recognises you're trying to take people off benefit and into work because that's better for them and also better for our fiscal position. And everyone recognises that we need to protect the most vulnerable. Where there is, honestly, some disagreement at the moment is on the issue of how do you give implementation to those principles. Now, normally at a second reading, you're only voting on the principles of legislation, and then in the report stage and the committee stage, you deal with that implementation. The effect of what's happened with this reasoned amendment being tabled is that that's brought forward the discussion of how to give implementation to those principles. So given the high level of agreement on the principles, the discussions over the coming days will really be about the implementation of those principles.
Do you have enough time to do that, or is it worth delaying the bill a little bit?
I think we've got time. There'll be discussions that will be happening. There's discussions that have started happening, and I expect that those conversations will continue.
So is what's tabled in the amendment going to be accepted by the government, or is this something of trying to table your own amendment to the bill? What's going to be the process?
Well, certainly the principles that are set out in the reasoned amendment, as I say, there's a high degree of commonality about with the government, so we can accept those principles because we share them. Equally, it's right to recognise these issues touch very deeply the Labour Party's sense of itself and the rights and responsibilities of members of Parliament. What I see is everyone trying to do their job well. Ministers trying to be open with Parliament as to the ambitions that we have. Members of Parliament being clear as to their responsibility to scrutinise this legislation and get it right. And that's the character of the conversation that's taking place between ministers and members of Parliament in the hours and days ahead.
I've no doubt everyone's trying to do their job well, but clearly someone's dropped the ball here to lead to a position where 120 of your own MPs, including all the committee chairs within, or 11 of the committee chairs. Is there pressure on Morgan McSweeney?
Listen, I'm much less interested in the gossip about SW1 than whether this legislation works on the streets, in the towns, in the communities right across the country. And my honest judgment, many of my friends have signed that amendment, friends and colleagues of long standing in the House of Commons, is that their primary motivation is to do well by their constituents, to get this legislation right. And there are some honest disagreements there as to whether this legislation yet is what they're looking for and whether there's ways that it can be improved. But I think it's to diminish the commitment of those Labour MPs to their constituents and, frankly, to seeing a difficult and challenging issue like welfare reform be got right by the government, to diminish it to some of the gossip and headlines that are inevitably around an issue like this. I accept that. But I think their motivations actually are about the legislation, the policy, and getting the policy right.
Well, with all due respect, it might not interest you, but it interests me. And, what I'm hearing there is you didn't suggest that there's pressure growing on Morgan McSweeney, which I think is striking.
Well, you're entitled to your opinion, I'm entitled to mine. The fact is, the Prime Minister... Just let me finish the point. The Prime Minister is in charge of Downing Street. You wouldn't reasonably expect me to be passing judgment on who's working in the Sky News team this morning. It's for the Prime Minister to make his judgments. The fact is, that team delivered us an historic victory only last July against expectations. What Keir Starmer did when he became leader of the Labour Party was what, over 18 years, Neil Kinnock, John Smith and Tony Blair managed. He managed it in 4 years against all expectations with the team in Downing Street. So I have deep respect for what was achieved. I also know that the task of government is hard. There are always going to be people with strong opinions on all sides of an issue like welfare reform. So I think what's much less interesting than how we got here or who's involved is whether we get the policy right. And that's the task that we're focused on in the coming days.
Well, listen, I totally accept all of that, but implicit in my question, or brings me to the next one, is if somebody doesn't take the blame for what has been an error in managing your own party to lead to this level of rebellion, then it's on the Prime Minister. for not managing internal party politics?
Honestly,
we all can have disagreements, but you could have had these discussions with your colleagues weeks or months ago, so it didn't lead to a point where 120 of your MPs have publicly said, we do not agree with our government on this central policy.
So I hope that this is an instance where maybe experience lends perspective. I was part of Tony Blair's government and Gordon Brown's government. I will remember what was a large rebellion very early after the 1997 landslide over the issue of lone parent benefits. What happened was a significant rebellion. There were screaming headlines. People were saying lessons must be learned. And what followed that rebellion was not just the largest fall in child poverty that we'd seen in generations, the largest fall in pensioner poverty, but a Labour government that had the capacity to come together and deliver for the people of the United Kingdom. I have every confidence that in time there will be a sense of proportionality and scale that's perhaps missing in some of the newspaper headlines this morning, because actually this is Parliament doing its job, it's the government doing its job for the people, and we're going to move forward together.
Well, with all due respect, you're implicitly suggesting that I'm inexperienced, and I'm afraid anyone can look at this.
I'm not saying that at all. I'm just offering the perspective of having gone through a previous rebellion where people said this was, if you like, of seismic consequence for the future of the Prime Minister, that Tony Blair had misjudged the issue. And the reality was that Tony Blair went on to be an extraordinarily successful Prime Minister in the course of that Parliament and in the subsequent years. So I think sometimes that historical perspective is useful.
120 MPs, including 11 committee chairs, is significant whichever way you try and frame this. And let's see what the Prime Minister meets when he comes home from NATO. And just to follow up on this, I don't think Tony Blair ever faced, a year into his government, what you face today with a new YouGov MRP poll that suggests your seats in Parliament, if an election was held today, would halve to 178. Did Tony Blair face that? I'm a bit inexperienced. Can you clarify for me?
He didn't face the multi-party politics that is a feature of politics more than 20 years after his time in office. But did we face challenging headlines and difficult political issues? 100%. The fact is, what we read in that MRP poll is a snapshot of public opinion less than a year, just under a year, into a Labour government that has a mandate for 5 years. So should we take it seriously? Yes, we absolutely should. As a snapshot of opinion today, but not necessarily a good guide to where we will be at the time of the general election. The greatest antidote to reform is an effective Labour government. We have time, we have the capacity to govern well over the coming 4 years. And when I read those headlines, what it teaches me is that there is undoubtedly a hunger for change in the country. That's what got us elected in July. It's why we feel the pressure of public opinion. But it's why we've already delivered, for example, lower waiting lists for the first time since 2008. It's why we've delivered a rise in national minimum wage. It's why we are busting our tails to deliver trade deals, growth and jobs for people in the United Kingdom. So we take that as an instruction to make sure that we move further and faster in relation to the change that we fully accept people want to see.
Convenient to use the historic example of the Tony Blair government when it suits you, but versus when it doesn't, to make your argument. I think the final question, I really want to get onto your trade stuff on this. Unequivocally, the government is saying the vote will go ahead on Tuesday?
Deputy Prime Minister made that clear yesterday.
OK, very interesting. So that's definitely going ahead then?
Well, as I say, the Deputy Prime Minister at the dispatch box in the House of Commons said the vote would happen.
Let's talk about what you are here to announce on the trade policy, which I find really interesting. And this is to try and follow up what's already been agreed for some goods trade on services as well. Is that the central point?
So we've done 3 trade deals in the last couple of months. We've done the deal with the United States, the deal with the European Union and the deal with India. What we set out today is a broader strategic framework that says, what are our ambitions going forward? You're right to recognise there's a big feature on services because we're an 81% services-based economy and there's a global services boom happening at the moment, so that's a big opportunity for British workers and for British jobs. What we've heard from the business community is many of the barriers they want to be taken down are not actually at the border, tariffs, but beyond the border. So we've got a whole series of measures in this strategy setting out how we're going to do that. Essentially quicker, sharper, more agile deals. At the same time, we're in a world where barriers are going up rather than coming down. It's more protectionist, it's more isolationist than even a few years ago. So we're also looking at whether we have the right trade defences to protect British business and British jobs from anti-competitive behaviour. And we've got new measures that we're setting out today in the strategy. And finally, of course, we're looking to provide better support for British business. We lost a whole number of businesses from the exporting business at the time of Brexit. We're determined to get them back into selling their goods and services to the world.
What I'm unclear on with this strategy is whether it leads domestically to more or less regulation. Is this a case of saying we know overseas our companies face regulation and we want to work to get that removed by foreign competitors? Or is it the other way around, which is to say we need to help you be competitive on the world stage, and if China's got lower regulation, we need to match it?
So we've listened to business who have told us that there are lots of barriers internationally that inhibit British business exporting more. So a very practical example, if you're selling pharmaceuticals from the UK, we've got world-class pharmaceutical companies. There are regulatory barriers in Egypt that make it difficult for you to sell pharmaceuticals into Egypt. So we will be working with regulators and with policymakers in Egypt and countries like that to make sure that where there are barriers that can be torn down to secure new markets and new opportunities for British business, we're grasping them for those companies.
Just on the topic of pharmaceuticals, since you mentioned it, where are we on the US pharmaceutical deal?
So they've still got their 232 investigation, they technically call it, underway. We're already in dialogue with the Americans. We've seen progress in relation to autos, we've seen progress in relation to aeronautics, but we're working hard in relation to steel. We're talking in relation to pharmaceuticals, but it's like any negotiation, relying on the Americans as well as the UK. But we're already the only government in the world to have done a deal with the Trump administration. We've delivered that, as you saw from the Prime Minister in Alberta already, but there's more work to do.
Minister, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank
Good to see you, Douglas Alexander.